Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Wednesday, September 17th, 2025, and this is our series, Heroes and Heroines of the Church. We've only been doing this particular series for a few months of time now, and sometimes we've picked people who are well known in church history, whether it's from our denomination or from some other denomination. And sometimes we're picking just average people that most folks wouldn't know about, missionaries and this sort of thing. Today, the person I've chosen to talk about is somebody who's been in the news very, very recently and for the last several years, Charlie Kirk. As a matter of fact, last Wednesday, when we arrived at the church on Wednesday afternoon, we have a ladies group that normally meets for a time of fellowship and games and study in the fellowship hall. And they'll have some refreshments along there at the same time that the camera operator and I are coming in to set up to do the midweek Bible study podcast. Last Wednesday when we arrived, one of the ladies in our ladies group had heard on the news and shared with everybody else the fact that Charlie Kirk had been shot. And so we stopped and we prayed for him and for his family. Some of the people in our ladies group knew who he is. Some, frankly, had never heard his name, particularly some of our senior adults, because you would likely know Charlie Kirk's name if you had young people, college-age people, or if you've paid attention to more conservative political leanings. A little bit about him as a person. He was 31 years old when we were here last week. All we knew was that he had been the target of a shooting. We didn't know the condition of his health. Before we left at the end of our Wednesday afternoon programs, we had gotten a telephone call letting us know that he had died from his wounds. And of course that's been a big major news story for this entire past week as first of all there was the search for who might have committed this crime and all kinds of discussion. Some of the discussion in the media frankly is very unfair to Mr. Kirk and his family. As an 18-year-old, he had the opportunity to go to college, started briefly at college and realized this is not where I need to be. This is not what God has called me to do. He had a vision for doing a ministry that was also politically active to uphold godly biblical standards, because he realized that what was going on in a lot of our college campuses was young people were being indoctrinated with being told certain things were right and moral and good and normal that went against what he knew from his Christian faith to be the case. And so he started this organization, Turning Point USA, and started a podcast program and has done a lot of work from 2012 until his death last week. And the programs and ministries and organizations that he started will continue to carry on the work. But the main thing is that he was doing it as a believer in Jesus Christ, engaging in the world and trying to uphold to the best of his understanding biblical values and biblical standards. And so he would go to college campuses with his organization, and they would set up just these pop-up tents and put up folding tables with some of their literature and programs and things, and invite people to come up and just engage in a conversation about morally correct behaviors and what's right and wrong. And he gave people the opportunity to say, if you disagree with me, let's talk about it. Because when people stop talking and choose to try to silence the other person through violent means, that doesn't help society. Let's talk about it. And so his basic thing was, okay, I'll take this position on an issue. Now prove me wrong. And he was willing to engage in conversation. And what a lot of the media has been reporting this past week, particularly when they want to slant it to oppose him, they would leave out the fact that very frequently he and his team of people, some of whom were volunteers, some of whom eventually became paid staff, were frequently attacked. People would come up and just start turning over their tables or trying to petition to not allow them to even have access to the campus or to be allowed to speak and have public debate. You've probably seen news reports not only of Mr. Kirk, but of other types of speakers who had to have police protection, had to be basically rescued from a mob wanting to silence their ability to even express their opinions. And Mr. Kirk's positions were biblically sound, godly positions. And so he was having conversations, inviting people to come up and talk about what's moral, what's right, and to point out that, hey, what's happening in our world today is that young people are showing up on college campuses, and rather than being taught to debate and to think for themselves and to have ideas, their values that they were raised with are being attacked. And there's been efforts to silence them. Not just happening to people like Mr. Kirk, but it's happened to a lot of other folks. You'd have to be living under a rock and not paying attention to the news to notice, for example, in the past 2 years, how Jewish students on college campuses were being denied access to classrooms, were being attacked, were being physically threatened and assaulted for nothing more than being Jewish. And he was speaking up and saying, no, people don't need to attack other folks. It's not a good idea to do that. We need to sit down and talk to people and discuss things from a moral standpoint. So yeah, he was doing that. He was just in the act last Wednesday when the assassination occurred of answering a question about one very hot topic issue of sexual orientation and transgenderism when the bullet rang out and hit him in the throat. There's a main artery that goes through there that if you have an injury to that particular artery, the carotid artery I think is what it's called, it's not survivable. It's not something that medical people can quickly fix. It's a case of you're going to bleed out very, very quickly. And sadly, the assassin's bullet killed him within a matter of just a moment or two. Probably no more than a minute or two before he would have passed away. But he died doing what he felt called of God to do, to point out that there is a moral standard that's given in God's Word, and that when we choose to go against God's standards for how we should live, there are consequences. That whenever God gives us a commandment, it is because God is either wanting to protect us from behavior that will be harmful to us or other people, or to provide something better for us. He was a big proponent of people getting married and having kids and raising a family, rather than going along with society's idea that you can just go out and have sexual contact with multiple partners and not worry about whether or not a child is being born without a stable two-parent home. He was proclaiming biblical truths. So some of the people who have been talking about it on the news and writing articles that appear in papers and magazines and online sources have been trying to portray him as just a right-wing conservative political activist. That doesn't describe who the man really is. The man was a believer in Jesus Christ who sought to live out his faith and to call out godly principles. And therefore, he died, and so it's appropriate to use the word martyr. When someone speaks out for the Christian faith, martyrs weren't just people in the actual Bible. There have been martyrs throughout church history, people who have spoken up on behalf of other people because God died for the sins of the world, people who have spoken up to proclaim God's truth. And some people don't like it and choose to respond violently against it. The reports in the media are that the bullet and some notes that were left near the scene of the assassination were messages indicating that the person who took his life was deliberately choosing to try to silence his voice. And yet, what's happened is the people who not only knew him, were good friends with him, but people who were volunteers in the organization and people who maybe had never heard of Charlie Kirk until last week, now realize what's happened and have realized that, okay, he's in heaven. He's received his well done, good and faithful servant. But there's still a world that's hurting, a world that's in pain, a world that's experiencing darkness and needs to see God's light in the darkness. And so other people need to step up and carry forward the work. When we look in our Bibles in the New Testament, as people like Peter and Paul are under arrest from the government and they know that their time of departing planet Earth is getting near, they're writing to encourage the people who are left behind to continue and carry on the work of ministry, to go out there and be the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. And so Charlie Kirk is a hero for our day and time because he died at the age of 31, leaves behind a wife and two very young children, a 3-year-old daughter and a 16-month-old son, who will largely only know their father from other people's stories about him and from pictures and video clips of family home movies. They won't get to grow up experiencing their father's love. But people need to carry on the ministry that he began of proclaiming God's truth, even when you're called vicious names, even when you're misunderstood, even when you're attacked, that we are called to be the light in the darkness, and that just like people attacked Jesus for telling truth, his followers will suffer some persecution. But you have to continue to spread the gospel throughout a lost and dying world. Thanks for watching.